Welcome to Our Own Voice, a partnership in mental health awareness in cooperation with NAMI Wichita and KSUN Community Radio. NAMI is a National Alliance on Mental Illness. We are the largest grassroots advocacy network for people with mental illness and their family members, with over 800 national affiliates and 15 Kansas affiliates, with NAMI Wichita being one of those 15. We provide awareness, support, education, and advocacy for people affected by mental illness. Our purpose here is to provide a community conversation on KSUN Radio that gives insight into what it's like to live with a mental illness. Our intention and our hope is that our program will change attitudes, assumptions, and stereotypes about people with mental health conditions. My name is David Larson. I am very pleased and proud to be your host today, and I am a person living with mental illness. I'm in recovery for major depressive disorder. Like everyone, I struggle with the ups and downs of emotions and the challenges of being fully human, but I am doing great. And I know I have many gifts to offer my family, my friends, and my community. And before I go on, I want to say a big thank you to our production team, to our executive producer, David Peterson.
Hello.
Hello, David. And to our technical producer, Mike Padilla. Hello, Mike.
Buenos dias.
Oh, excellent. You just made us bilingual. I like that. That's awesome.
Sí.
So now it is my pleasure to introduce our guest for today, Fred James. Hello, Fred.
Hello, hello, hello.
We should
Glad
all
to be
applaud.
here. Yes.
Yes. Fred, there is a lot of reasons to applaud you, but we're going to start out by asking you tons of questions. Okay? First question is, where were you born and where did you grow up?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin, September 1929. Do your arithmetic. I'll be 90 years old later this year. Oh, boy.
That's phenomenal.
So you had to have him do that, didn't you? So now he feels his total age.
Well,
now.
my daughter won't let me retire, and my psychiatrist says that is very, very good therapy. Keep it up.
It is very good therapy. I
He
would agree
also
with that.
said go to Breakthrough Club and do things like this, which we're doing right now.
Well, so let me jump ahead then
Yes.
to what is your diagnosis?
My diagnosis is, and I didn't know this until hospital, but it runs in my family. My maternal grandmother was a dear, wonderful, sweet lady, my mother's mother. On her good days, she was delightful. She was hilariously funny. We laughed and laughed and laughed, and on her bad days, I didn't want to be there. It was frightening, and I was a teenager and old enough to drive her back and forth. I inherited that. And what I also inherited because of my age was something that she didn't have, and that was expert psychiatry and expert medication. And
Yes.
what you see and hear here are the result of that, without which I would not be here.
And so what is that diagnosis?
Diagnosis is it used to be called manic depressive. It's called bipolar now. And
Right.
It's very simply, as most of you know, it's not just depression, it's deep depression, it's cyclical, it comes and goes in days, sometimes weeks, and then the opposite is running off at the mouth and
Lots of energy.
figuratively climbing walls.
Yeah.
Right.
And both of them are terrifying to other people, and worse than that for me.
Yeah.
And that's the whole
because-
concept of being bipolar, is that one pole or one situation you feel one way, and then the exact opposite of that is when you can feel the same thing, right?
Extreme.
And that's what you said it was your grandmother.
Yes, my maternal grandmother.
So then obviously she may have been bipolar also.
Oh, extremely so.
I see.
Extremely so. And I say extremely because all there was then was lithium, which is not a very good remedy, and electroshock.
Right.
And they use that as a threat. You behave or you will get electric shock. That's primitive. That's
Very.
That's,
Well,
I'm a
it's-
geologist. I call that Cretaceous.
Except that there is ECT, electroconvulsive therapy, that can be helpful for those
Yes.
people who are medicine resistant.
Yes.
And that's important that it's used for people who are medicine resistant.
But the other
but
thing
it's
too
not-
is that the brain is an electrical thing.
Right.
And,
It's
you know.
sort of like a reboot of the brain is
Right,
what happens.
right.
But it's a lot different than it was back in the
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
let me tell you something about that. At Breakthrough Club, and we're going to talk about that, I've been a member and I'm with the founders, maybe not a founder, but I was their first, this was after hospital, and stabilized emotionally. So in Breakthrough, I was delighted to be a member way back then, 35 years ago. And I was their first board director.
Okay.
Chairman of the board. And
Excellent. You should be applauded for that.
well, it was delightful,
Bravo.
and they wanted me because I'm a business person. I'm my daughter and I have the smallest oil company you ever saw. She's a former banker, and she does the numbers, and I do the science, and I say drill here, and maybe we find oil.
Okay.
Those are the good days.
That's excellent. Well, I'm going to have to cut you off here.
Yes.
And go to our first break. This is Our Own Voice on KSN Community Radio. We're going to take a quick break, and we will be right back with Fred. Welcome back to Our Own Voice, a partnership in mental health awareness in cooperation with NAMI Wichita and KSN Community Radio. NAMI is a national alliance on mental illness. And Fred, I'm going to ask you a question here because that was some of your music. Can you tell us about that song?
It was the Johnny Harris Quintet, and the pianist that you hear on there is Johnny Harris, a dear friend and my boss for quite some time. Let me just say something about that.
So who was that playing the trumpet?
He's talking to you
Exactly.
someplace in this room. Let's just talk about that for a moment, then I can go to something else in my family and some of our experience, which I think translates to a lot of people that are listening probably. Sensitivity. Mental illness is fairly more prevalent than usual in artistic people. You just heard some jazz. I'm the mentally ill one, the trumpet player, in that particular situation, and the rest of them are my dear friends. Let me tell you who they are because I think those of you that listened to a lot of jazz way back a few decades ago, are we almost through?
No.
Johnny Harris, the leader. Johnny is one of the greats in music. He was my boss for 20 years. That was my master's degree in music right there. And
Awesome.
I had no formal education. I just listened to a lot of great people. And
You got your education from the School of Hard Knocks.
I was scared to death every night on the bandstand, and then I looked around and I saw people smiling, and I figured, oh, okay.
You're doing something right.
Yeah, I've got some old tape recordings too, and some of them are, and others are, oh boy.
Awesome.
We all go through that. The thing of it is that so often, Abraham Lincoln had a mental illness, it's now realized. But along with musicians, let me just mention a few of those of you who know jazz. Thelonious Monk, great piano player. Charles Mingus, wonderful bass player, orchestrator, writer. Billie Holiday, the most sensitive, she draws tears, beautiful vocalist, and tragically ill. Lester Young, also very, very much influenced everybody on the tenor saxophone. Bud Powell on the piano, and finally Pee Wee Russell, who did the clarinet like nobody else ever could, and nobody really understood it, but we all loved it.
But so these are all musicians
Oh,
that
yes.
had mental health issues.
Right, and there's a story about Pee Wee, which I'll do, and then we'll go on. But one of the great musicians and band leaders was Eddie Condon, Irish boy who had a nice pub in New York, and Pee Wee was his clarinetist, and Pee Wee was one who indulged very, very frequently and generously, and he'd be in and out of hospital. And finally, years later, he didn't look too good, but he still played incredibly good. Somebody's walking down the street and says, "Eddie, did you hear that Pee Wee died?" "How could you tell?"
Oh boy.
That's funny, but that's kind of sad, though, too.
Yeah.
Well, Eddie had a sense of humor.
Yeah. Morbid sense of humor.
Really,
Yeah.
but it was factual.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's excellent.
But that music, what was the title of that music?
Which
that-
one?
What was the
that
song that we just
song
heard? We heard
yeah.
that song.
Oh, that's one that I wrote. It's called Blues for Bill.
Fantastic.
Blues for
And
Bill.
who's Bill?
Bill Reeves was the chef and the owner of Bill's Le Gourmet, which
That's
was
what
a-
I thought. Bill's Le
a-
Gourmet.
Oh, it's a jazz club like none other
Exactly.
in Wichita. It was my
That-
second home.
Doesn't exist anymore.
No, but he
It's
had about
unfortunate.
30, 40 years of it, and
Yeah.
with
Well-
the jazz festival, which I was part of.
I'm going to have to cut you off again, Fred.
Well, go
This
ahead.
is Our Own Voice on KSN Community Radio, and we were talking with Fred about mental illness. We're going to take a quick break and be right back.
If you would like to learn more about the National Alliance on Mental Illness and how you can get involved in mental health advocacy, please visit our website at NAMI.org.
Welcome back to Our Own Voice, a partnership in mental health awareness in cooperation with NAMI Wichita and KSN Community Radio. NAMI is a National Alliance on Mental Illness, and I was totally drawn into that music again. So
I loved
was-
it.
It's,
I loved
it's
it.
awesome.
Yeah, the drums sound great
Yeah.
in that.
I just
Dave Adams,
Yeah.
local guy.
Yeah, exactly.
so can you share with us what it was that brought you to that moment of seeking help, of seeking.
Well, as a child, I didn't know. My mother, of course, her mother was extremely ill, and my mother didn't recognize mental illness. They didn't call it that then. She had other words for it. She had other words for my spells of depression even before I was a teenager, and it kept getting a little bit worse, and my mother would say, "I don't know why you're so depressed, because you've got everything," and of course that was a guilt trip, and that is not the thing to say to a mentally ill person. But she didn't know any better, and a
Right.
lot of people still don't. So went in the Army, got married, and about 2 years later, my mental illness was hitting the peak, and my wife finally said with tears, and she said, and I had 2 little babies, and she said, "Fred, you're scaring the heck out of me, and you're scaring the heck out of the babies, and you got to do something about this, or I can't live with you." That saved my life. I put myself in the Menninger Hospital, which was state of the art in psychiatry. You talk to any doctor who's older, and they will say the same thing, that those 2 Menninger brothers were absolutely brilliant, and they revolutionized treatment of mental illness, and I was one of them. So things got better after that, and then my 3rd son turned out that he had the genes also, and when he was over 21 and no longer a child, we said, You got to do something about this, Peter. You can't live here. You either get a job or you go to the hospital, or Dad can't say you got to do this. You got to do it for yourself. This is why so much mental illness goes untreated, because Dad says you have to, Mom says you have to, my wife says you have to, and so forth. But they should not make the phone call. You need to do this, and you need to want to do this, and only then are you your own boss, and can you be adequately healed.
Yeah.
That's very important. Peter, my son Peter, was in state hospital for a long time. He is now a marvelous musician, a piano player, and I lost my track. That's 90 years old.
But he's doing real well, and he continues.
He's got a lovely wife,
to be a musician. Is that
lovely
right?
wife, and 3 absolutely wonderful children. One of his grandson just got married, and I was there, a wedding in St. Louis. We're a Scottish family, and he came to the altar in kilts.
Oh, awesome.
That's excellent.
That's so cool.
But not only that, he had a bagpipe.
Oh,
That's
wow.
great.
Well, Fred, you just got through saying that you're not cured, though, are you? Is that correct? Do you still take medication?
The word cure almost never appears in knowledgeable mental health. Management is the word.
Yeah.
Okay.
And what you see here is not cure, it's management. A wonderful psychiatrist and excellent state-of-the-art medications. Here I am.
Yeah, we talk about not so much we talk about it being that we are in recovery. And recovery isn't a destination, it's a process.
A management.
Yeah, it is a continuum where you are constantly working at
Yes.
it and constantly striving. You are doing such techniques as mindfulness, as exercise, as therapy, as talk therapy, as
Right.
individual therapy, whatever it is, group therapy.
And friendship, which is the purpose of Breakthrough Club.
Yes.
Our motto, and people say this with a smile. These are people like me. Our motto is mutual support.
Mutual support.
That's what we exist on. A lot of smiles, and some people have learned how to smile. They couldn't before. Another word that I hear frequently in Breakthrough is safe.
Yeah.
Because out there, they're not. And you've already talked, I think, and NAMI has, about our real push to stop putting sick people in jail.
Yeah.
It's terrible. This DA, and I'm sorry, but I'm quoting, I'm a member of ACLU, and ACLU did a survey of all of the Kansas counties. Sedgwick County is one of the worst. Everybody goes to jail.
Well,
Now,
we're all working on that, Fred. And
We
that's-
are indeed. I'm
I want
on
to
that.
interject with a phone number that we'll give
Yes.
you a little bit later, some more information, and that is 316-686-1373, 316-686-1373, and we'll dive into what that number can do for you when we come back.
Exactly. So this is Our Own Voice on KSN Community Radio. We are talking with Fred, and we are going to take a quick break and be right back.
This guy's a killer pianist.
Welcome back to Our Own Voice, a partnership in mental health awareness in cooperation with NAMI Wichita and KSN Community Radio. NAMI is the National Alliance on Mental Illness. And David, before the break, you gave us that wonderful number that we use, and I want you to give that number again and share with us what that number means.
I definitely will. It's 316-686-1373, 316-686-1373, and that is our NAMI number that you go to, and you'll get a voice. It's a voicemail, and we'll return the call as soon as possible. I'm not going to talk that much today about our programs, but we have a lot of programs, a lot of support groups. But with Fred here and your beautiful entry music and Fred's fantastic jazz.
He's quite a musician, isn't he?
He really is. I'm going to give it up. But if
Well, you
anybody
heard
would
the
like
pe-
to know more about NAMI, please
Well,
give us a call.
You heard the piano player. That was Johnny Harris, and he was my boss and my professor. In fact, that term professor goes way back to New Orleans, and it didn't mean that you had a college degree. It meant that you are the professor of music on the piano, and you are the tops.
There was
Yeah.
a famous jazz musician called the Professor. Professor.
Oh,
can you remember? I can't.
Well,
yeah.
Louis Armstrong was, but he was a trumpet player. By
Right.
the way, he was my as a young college student. Louis Armstrong, I was already playing trumpet and cornet, and I sat down and talked with Louis Armstrong, and Armstrong said, "Hey, man, you play?" And I said, "Yes, sir. I play cornet." "That was my first instrument." And I said, "Yes, sir. I know. I've got all the records."
Awesome.
Bravo.
Oh, I loved him.
Yes,
I met him twice, and I got his picture autographed in my bedroom.
But you're one of the few people who's identified Miles Davis in our live room.
I'm going to give you that story. Here, a very, very short joke. Miles Davis and John Coltrane played. Davis, of course, trumpet player. Coltrane, tenor sax. Both geniuses. Geniuses. Total opposites. Miles played very sparingly and beautiful stuff. Coltrane was just notes all over the place, and he was a brilliant musician. But he would play forever, and finally they were in a recording studio, and Miles had a kind of a raspy voice too, and he said, "Coltrane, how come you play so long?" He said, "Well, I didn't know how to stop." "Take the horn out of your mouth."
That's right.
What I really like about this interview is that he's a horn player, and most musicians don't blow their own horn, so we have to blow it for him.
That's right.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't blow no more. That quit about 10 years ago because the horn is. The trumpet is a difficult instrument.
It's a physical instrument.
It's all
isn't
flesh
it?
and blood. It's all
Right.
flesh and blood, and winding
And
up
those
in your
lips.
lips. Right.
Yeah.
And most trumpet players, very, very few. The only exception that I can think of was my dear friend Clark Terry, who was
Clark Terry,
big time in the Wichita Jazz Festival.
Well,
Clark
sure.
played until he was 100.
Right.
Wow.
Most of them quit when they are 70 or 80, and
Well,
I did.
Let's get back to mental illness.
Well,
Okay.
No, do we have to?
get back to mental illness, but at the same time,
It's important.
it's difficult to hash out all the things that I want to talk about, and we don't have much time to finish.
Talk about it.
So yeah, let me just throw this one at you. When did you first encounter the work of NAMI?
Oh gosh, about halfway through Breakthrough Club, which would have been probably 25 years ago.
Okay.
And I've been not a very active member because I'm active at Breakthrough.
Yeah.
And but I contribute, and I know those people, and they're wonderful. It's a marvelous, and we're NAMIs too because we have a son that I told you about, my son Peter and myself. It's a wonderful organization. Please, please, please support it. And support us at Breakthrough because we give people all new lives. We take them out of jail, and it's wonderful. That's another story, but it's going to happen.
Yeah. Well, you have a list there on your paper in front of you, and I want to give you the question that's going to lead to that list.
Okay.
And that question is, who are your heroes or heroines?
I already mentioned Louis Armstrong, one of the finest gentlemen I've ever met.
And you did a very, very good.
yes, he did.
Yeah, that sounded great. It was like he was in the studio. I loved it.
Yeah.
That was great.
You play, man.
Exactly. That was great. Okay, go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted.
And I think Johnny Harris too. My wife, the love of my life. Somebody asked me where I live. Do you think you'll ever get married again? And I said, well, as of right now, I had and have the love of my life. So I would say yes. My mother and dad, I think, and that's most of it.
Okay. All right. Well, and
This has been a joy.
I want to get him back in here so we can jam.
That
Although he
sounds
said he's
awesome.
not blowing the horn all that much anymore. So.
Our own voice, and we do it all in musical.
That's right. Yeah, we should do that in form. But
Well,
I think one of the things that we kind of left out is music is an extremely good coping skill.
It is, and it's how I have my coping skill, and I'm sure Fred has his.
It's therapy.
Yes.
Therapy.
Ask any psychiatrist; they'll tell you.
And
Yes.
I have to call it quits, folks. Thank you for joining us for Our Own Voice on Case and Community Radio. Thank you to Fred for talking to us about mental illness, and join us for our next Our Own Voice program.